The Education of OverSoul7 by Jane Roberts, read by Martin John. Chapter 16, Maja's Signature in Stone and Sumter's Surprise, and Aspect 3. While OverSoul7 was perceiving the tile in two of its many aspects, and Lydia was slipping back and forth in time, Maja stood in the courtyard of the speakers. "Who called me?" she asked again, and again she received no reply. She shrugged and looked up to see Sumter walking purposefully toward her. Coming close, he smiled and pointed at the tree drawing on the wall nearby. "Mamun Shah," he said. He squatted down easily beside her, a habit he'd recently taken to minimize the difference in their sizes. "I thought Sanorraja was the word for tree," Maja said in her new language. He grinned. "Sometimes it is. Sometimes tree is Urumba. That's a tree at night, when there's no moon. Lidata, that's a tree splashed with sun. Kadatia, that's a tree with leaves dancing." He was laughing now, but serious. His laughter disconcerted her. It reminded her that he had feelings. "Look at that drawing and make up a word that fits it," he said. Maja stared at him uneasily. "Go on," Sumter said. "Brambita. Then that's what the tree drawing is in this moment." "But I just made it up." Despite herself, Maja was laughing too. "Exactly. When you force certain specific words on to objects, you limit them and their reality to you. So we have certain words which you've learned for the purposes of classification, but we never make the mistake of confusing the object with the name we've given it. All objects are changing constantly. No one word could ever express the entire reality of any one thing in all of its many aspects." She liked him best now when he was teaching her. In that role she could accept him and not feel threatened. Now she shook her head, laughing back at him. "But you are Sumter. That's a name." "It's the name I gave you as mine at the moment you asked me," he said soberly. "You mean it isn't your name?" Maja was scandalized. "It is sometimes. I call myself other names too." "If you don't have the same name, how will people know who you are?" "My face tells them," he said. "At different times my friends call me different names too, and I call myself what I please." She didn't like the odd warmth in his expression as he spoke. It had currents of coolness in it, too, but also a lazy, frightening invitation. "I call you Sumter," she said, almost angrily. "That's because you try to limit my reality for your own purposes," he said with rancor. "You try to limit your perception of me, too. But right now I call you by two names, Sorana and Murunda. These names and words suggest two parts of you, seemingly in conflict at this instant." "I'm Maja," she said, irritated. She sprang up and paused. Sumter made no move to follow her. "What two aspects?" she asked in spite of herself. "The desire to control and the desire to surrender," he said. Her thighs felt warm and her head felt cold. The remark was so true of her in so many different ways that she just stood staring down at him. "We're called speakers because we try to speak inner knowledge," Sumter said softly. "Often we put it into words for people who need them. But otherwise we free ourselves from words. The people in the world you came from are just beginning a long journey into discovery. We came here to help them because that's our purpose." Sumter suddenly looked away. Maja watched him, curious. He seemed almost uneasy. "We're beginning to mix our race with yours. Already on other parts of the earth this process has begun. You're a part of this, Maja. It's time for you to mate. Since you're with us and don't want to return to your old world, then you should choose a man from the speakers." "Choose you?" she said vehemently. "That's what you want, or what I was supposed to do." "Choose whomever you will," Sumter said, "but you must join your stock with ours or return." "Why? I won't go back," she shouted. He smiled, yet she sensed a great impatience beneath his manner. "You've been a good pupil," he said. "You learn quickly. Your race will take centuries to learn what we've managed to teach you so far. But we can't stay here forever, for reasons I won't go into now. You must pass on what you're learning to your own people, and the mixtures of your own stock is important." The sun was hot on the tiled courtyard floor. Maja stared down as Sumter talked. The shadows of night would soon be falling, and she shivered. He was giving her an ultimatum, and she had the sudden feeling that she had to come to a decision before the evening came. "Some of our knowledge is written in our blood," Sumter said. His soberness was upsetting Maja more and more. "It's become a part of our physical stuff," he went on, watching her. "It will be passed on, latent, but full of potential. It will emerge, time and time again." He didn't stand up, but she had the impression that he was standing. Beneath his words she was dimly aware of other nonverbal meanings. She thrilled to it and was frightened at the same time. "Knowledge exists in every form possible," Sumter said. "What you've learned is written in your soul, which is independent of your body. But it's also in the body you inherit from the earth, in the cells, and that knowledge is passed on, whether or not it's ever consciously recognized or used." He paused and added, "I want you to have a child with that heritage. I want you to mix your stock with mine." Maja's eyes flew wide open. Until now, he's always said our stock or your people. Now he was saying his stock and I want you too. Suddenly she thought of the drawing of the strange bird with all the people emerging from its belly. "You weren't born here. You weren't, were you?" "No," he answered, watching her face. "You came from that bird in the drawing? I used to think that it was a real bird, but it must be something different." "It is something different, but I can't discuss that particular subject with you yet. Not until you take the part that you must take if you stay here." Maja frowned. "I won't go back. That's all there is to it. Not willingly. And I know enough about your people to know you wouldn't use force. But I don't like to do something because I'm supposed to, either. I know how animals mate. Rampa and I have done that often, if that's what you mean. You say children come that way, but Rampa and I had none. If I had any, they'd be mine. So I'm not sure what you want me to do. If it's what Rampa and I did, why didn't you just say so? That's only natural and makes you feel good all over. But you must mean more than that in some way I don't understand, or you wouldn't be making such a fuss about it. What you and Rampa did, we will do then, Sumter said very formally. That's all that you wanted? Maja was astonished. Why did you and Rampa stay together? He asked quietly. Why, we needed each other. It was much easier to hunt for food, and we helped protect each other. Why else? No other reason? Sumter asked carefully. What other reason could there be? Did you feel toward each other the way Rampa and Orina seem to feel now? He asked. Maja's face darkened. No, she paused and said accusingly. You feel that way toward me sometimes, though, and it makes me uneasy. I thought that you wanted me to feel that way too, whatever that way is. I didn't understand that you just wanted me to do what Rampa and I did, or I had said yes at once. I haven't done it since I've been here, and I've missed it, too. She expected Sumter to laugh, now that the matter was cleared up. Instead, some hope seemed to drain away from his face. He looked up at her and said, I'll never threaten your sense of emotional freedom. I'll settle for what you can give me now. And the mating, hopefully, will bring a child. You are much healthier than you were. Maja looked up, startled, to see that the shadows were beginning to fall. There had been no decision to make then. Yet she felt oddly cheated, as if there had been a decision that she hadn't seen or recognized, and should have. Just mate, as Rampa and I did? She asked again. Yes, Maja, Sumter said quietly. Well, let's do it now, then. She threw herself down on the ground laughing. I'll never understand why you just didn't say so. You made such a fuss that I got the idea that something more was involved, something I didn't understand. Then, at the expression on his face, she cried, What's wrong? Yet all the time she felt that she knew without knowing, and that he knew. Knew what? You've got that look again, she said accusingly. And you're Sarana and Murunda again, Sumter said. She sprang up, grabbed a loose stone, shouted defiantly, I'm Maja, and scratched the symbol for her name into one of the floor tiles as deeply as she could. There, she shouted triumphantly. Now we mate or not. The part of you that can mate now will mate, Sumter said, and he thought she was unpossessable, like the world from which she'd come. Innocent, splendid, shrewd, and perhaps terrible in the same way that a storm was. Maja began to slip off her robe. Not here, he said quickly. The tiles are too hard. We'll use one of my private couches. She shrugged. Now at least she thought she understood what was wanted. It was something she wanted too. There was no conflict. She ran along beside him quite happily. She considered the whole affair so matter-of-factly that Sumter was deeply troubled. So far, emotional feelings weren't connected in her mind with sex at all. He'd suspected as much, but he wondered what to do with his own longings for the part of her that even she had not yet discovered. "I'm walking on the tiles' faces," Maja said. Now she felt anticipatory and carefree. "Yes," he said. "Wait, while the tiles are shifting," she cried out in alarm and ran ahead of them. Sumter caught her arm. "Of course they aren't. See? They aren't moving. I saw them. I was looking down and they began to crawl. Yet they stayed in the same place." Maja shivered. "Well, they're not moving now," he said. "No, but when they moved I got frightened. They made me think of things. If we mate and have a child, then it will live and come and go and be forgotten like a wolf cub. That's what I thought when the tiles moved. Or maybe I just thought they moved. But something shifts and we die. I've seen dead animals, and eaten them and never thought about it before. Our child, if we have one, will have many birthdays," Sumter said, "and live to grow old." But Maja stood there, still startled. Her feelings had erupted, feelings not connected with hunger or necessity, free emotions welling up as she remembered them doing only once or twice before in her life. Astonished, she said, "Feelings move inside people." "You've felt emotions before." "But I didn't have the time to know what I felt," she said, wonderingly. "I never had feelings before that I didn't have to do something about right away. Well, once I did, watching a storm when I was safe in a cave, or maybe a few times that I've forgotten. I don't know if I like this kind of feeling or not. You can't do anything about it." "Something shifts," Sumter said, echoing her earlier remark. "Strange." He refused to read her thoughts, though he could have easily. But he knew that something had happened to her. In some way she'd changed, opened. She walked pensively now, beside him. Quite unaccountably he felt sorry for her. The birth of feelings, and feelings reflections, he thought. And into Maja's mind rushed memories of her earlier life, in the world of cliffs and hunger, light and night's unmitigated darkness. The contrast had been so brilliant and demanding that there'd been no time to think. They'd just seemed given, and she'd accepted them without questions. Now she'd discovered her memory clear and unblemished. Yet there was no reason to remember. The memories just came. "I won't go back there," she said in a hard voice. "You won't have to," Sumter broke off, realizing that for the first time, perhaps, in her voice, Maja had given him a real glimpse of her life before she came to the speakers. She'd told him all the details before, but in such a matter-of-fact way that her emotional response to the environment never came through. With all he knew about her, she gave little of herself. They were almost at his quarters. It was a humble enough stone structure with a single unit, the basic pyramid-shaped center sheba or center room, with two smaller rooms on each side. The tiled floors were covered here and there with small white wool rugs, and the walls hung with tapestries in bright, glowing colors. Sumter led her to a side room, with its wide windows and low couch. The dwelling was much like the one the speakers had given her. "I've never mated where it was protected like this," Maja said, and suddenly she was uneasy and shy. "Usually we just mated when we felt like it, on the spot. All this talking," she began stalking about the room, but Sumter didn't want to just take her, though she seemed quite ready, and his own attempts to give her time were apparently making her nervous. "Sit here for a minute," he said. "Once we mate, I have much to tell you about the speaker's background. How we came here, traditions we hope to pass on. But we maintain this place in ways that you don't yet understand. One day all of it will be yours. It will belong to the children of matings such as ours. Still, will vanish from the face of the earth as we are. Mingling, we give up certain qualities that we've retained if we kept our stock pure." Maja sat there listening, wondering if the speakers really mated or only talked about it. At the same time, Sumter's voice had a soothing, hypnotic quality that she enjoyed, and a liquid-like fluidity of feeling rose and fell within her as she listened. "We'll retain our most characteristic natures," he said. "We'll go truly inward, though, reaching men in the dream state, where words are really only symbols." She suddenly looked truly curious. "Why, that's like the old man, I suppose," she said. "I see him in my dreams often, or I did. I can't remember seeing him lately." "Speakers appear frequently in people's dreams, and sometimes they are seen as old men. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Sumter stared at her, amazed. "He's just the old man," Maja said. "He isn't a speaker because he isn't as tall as your people." "Is he always as an old man?" "Of course," she said firmly. "Are you aware of him at other times?" "No. Well, sometimes there are thoughts that don't seem to be mine, so I suppose they're his. I don't know why. Like the time I ran up the pyramid steps. It was like having a dream while I was awake." Sumter's face grew so serious that she broke off. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." "Well, then, I feel better." Maja started to throw the robe off, this time with mischievous haste. Sumter stared at her. She was there, offering herself so carelessly, yet he had to meet her on the terms she offered now. After what she'd just told him, a meeting of the tribunal was a necessity. Only for the moment he had to relate to her as the person she thought she was, and to try to forget the person he suspected she might be. She was right. Something happens and reality begins shifting. And most important, Maja had been that someone else the day she went running up the pyramid steps. In Chapter 16, Peace, Light, and Love. Aloha.